This is Bob Andelman, and this is a Mr. Media interview recorded live on blogtalkradio.com on January 2, 2008. Pete Von Sholly's day job would be enough excitement for most of us. He creates storyboards for big-budget Hollywood movies. And if you've seen The Shawshank Redemption or Mars Attacks, for example, the finished product was based on his early drawings. But being a respected behind-the-scenes craftsman isn't satisfying Von Sholly's fertile mind. For several years, he's been meshing a unique form of comics and cartoons that combine hand-drawn images with real life. Sometimes he displays an EC Comics style of horror. Sometimes his dinosaur fetish is on display for all to see. Lately, though, Von Sholly has turned his attention to politics, and the result is hilarious. Capital Hell, a collection of postcards published in book form by Dennis Kitchen Publishing. Pete, welcome to Mr. Media.
Hello, Bobby. Good morning.
Hey, Pete, how are you?
I'm beside myself. I don't know which one of me you should talk to.
Well, maybe we can have both of you on the interview.
Yeah, it goes.
Pete, tell me a little bit about Capital Hell. Why are you so mean to America's beloved political leaders?
Well, how many people did Freddy Krueger kill?
I lost track.
Or Godzilla. Or all the movie monsters you can think of, roll them all together. How many people did they kill?
Well,
they didn't kill anybody. Because they're made up. But how many people did Pol Pot kill and Adolf Hitler? Not that our leaders are anything like them, but, people that do really bad things are the real monsters, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the things going on in the world just screamed out for some comment, hopefully in an entertaining way.
Do you think the last couple of years we've been afraid to make fun of political leaders? Has the environment changed?
I don't know. I mean, it seems like your patriotism is suspect if you make fun of anybody.
So should we be suspect of your patriotism, Pete?
It depends how you define patriotism, I guess. I actually just was noticing that Dick Cheney kind of looks like a mean guy in certain pictures, and Rudy Giuliani looks like Nosferatu whenever I see him. And that's just a visual observation. Bad pictures maybe, I don't know. But every time I see these guys, I think, man. So I made up a couple joke images of them as monsters and sent them to Dennis Kitchen, mostly as a "Isn't this funny?"
Mm-hmm.
sort of a throwaway gag kind of thing. And Dennis jumped on the idea and said, this might make a great political postcard book if I could come up with 24 of them. So that's all I needed to hear.
Mm-hmm. And you've got Dick Cheney. It becomes a version of Dracula as Dickula.
He's Dickula, yeah. Sucking the life out of Colin Powell.
Rudy Giuliani is Nosferatu from Nosferatu.
Mm-hmm.
I liked one of my favorites, of course, is, and it's not because it's necessarily the best image, but Dr. Jekyll. That would be our current president. John Murtha became Mirthra, like in a Godzilla movie.
Right.
What were some of your favorites to do?
Well, the creature from the black community just made me laugh when it's Al Sharpton. And I knew there was a picture of the creature from the Black Lagoon in chains, and I thought that would be just a great image to put Al Sharpton in. He's such an opportunist. And, a lot of the people that we started out mentioning happen to be Republicans, but they are not the only ones to blame. And I think that if you look at the book, you will see Bill and Hillary and Barack Obama and everybody else. It's a even-handed. Melvin Van Peebles said that I was an equal opportunity offender.
I think that's fair to say. Yeah, I mean, the Clintons get their fair share. They become the Clintonsteins, as in Frankenstein and the Bride.
Yeah, kind of interchangeable.
And actually, you get Hillary in there twice. What is the second one that Hillary is?
Actually, the still is from 20 Million Miles to Earth. It's a Ray Harryhausen movie. But Dennis was talking about the Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, and I thought that, first of all, there's a tricky process if anybody looks at the book. I had to find pictures of monsters and pictures of politicians that worked together. And I didn't want to change the people's faces too much because they have to look, Dick Cheney has to look like Dick Cheney, even if he's dressed up as Dracula. You still have to know who they are. So finding the right pictures was tricky, and there's no great stills from Attack of the 50-Foot Woman. And so I thought, well, a giant woman picture will do, and so I ended up using a different image to work from with her.
It's a great. I think it's one of the best ones in there. I mean, and there's some that harken back. You have Ronald Reagan as Ron Zombie.
Yes, I like that one.
Which I can't make up my mind if that is supposed to be him as he would be today, or if that's him while he was in office. I think either one could really kind of fit.
Yeah, you decide.
Let me pause for a second, and while we're talking about this, I want to tell people that they can see some of these images online at either of your websites. It's www.capital-toothpicks.com or Von Shollywood. That's Von Sholly and then wood.com. And there's also a video on YouTube. I believe if you search Capital Hell, 2 words, you will see a video for this.
Yeah, I made a little animated film to augment the book. Also, I recorded the music for it. It's a minor key version of the Star-Spangled Banner, and replete with gunfire and screams and explosions and things. It's kind of a pithy little tune.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to say also that while you're looking at that and listening, you can call in and talk to Pete, ask some questions. Our number is 646-595-3135. We've got plenty of open lines. 646-595-3135. Who was the toughest politician to capture in this format?
There wasn't anybody especially tough. You remind me of something, if I may digress just a little, is there are a lot of images that aren't in the book. One of my favorites was Larry King as the Hunchback, and I've got him up on the parapet of the castle. This great still from the Hunchback with Larry King's face on it, and it's King of the Castle. And since we had to, and also what's his name, Blair in England. We've got the Blair Wolf of London with him as the Werewolf of London, and with a British Petroleum lab he's got going there. So not all of the pictures made it into the book. But the hardest thing sometimes was simply going through pictures. I didn't want to steal people's pictures. I wanted to use pictures that I was pretty sure were up for grabs, and also modify them enough so it wouldn't really be just taking somebody else's work. But that was the hardest part, was finding sometimes the lighting had to match, and you'd be surprised, you search a certain politician looking for images, and you find the same image 1,000 times. It's like, no, I need the light on this side. I need this kind of an expression. So I don't recall anybody special, but the hardest part was getting something where the two pictures would blend seamlessly.
Is it a Photoshop process you use? Tell me about the mechanical side.
Yeah, it's Photoshop. I learned Photoshop. I was at Disney Feature Animation for a couple of years, and that was a mixed experience. It started out great, and it turned absolutely horrible. But while we were there, this was during the making of the movie Dinosaur.
Oh.
And I love dinosaurs, as you mentioned, and as you will notice, if you look at anything about me, you'll see a dinosaur pop up whenever I get the chance. So working on this dinosaur movie, they had Doug Henderson and Ricardo Delgado and David Krentz and Tom Enriquez and Mark Hallett and Brian Franchak. And these are all names that people who were into dinosaurs would know, all great artists. And me, for what I'm worth, and we had all this talent applied to this project, and it was so sad to see it turn into such a lousy movie. But anyway, while I was there, this was all hand-drawn artwork, of course. They gave classes in Photoshop, and then I kind of asked for a transfer to another film because I felt so useless. I never had that on a job before where I felt like I'm not helping, I can't help, and I love dinosaurs, and this is killing me. Mm-hmm. So they didn't like me because of that, and so they tried to lay me off. But I had time on my contract. I know this is a long story here, but we got time, right?
That's all right.
Okay, so I had about 9 months sitting home getting paid, which was the best job ever. Because they wouldn't pay me off, and I had a contract, and we said, give me 50 cents on the dollar for what's left of my contract, and we'll call it a day. And they, oh no, we can't do that. So weeks turned into months, and I kept getting paid every week, and there was nothing to do because I wasn't assigned on a film. And so I stayed home and learned Photoshop. I figured, having been exposed to it at Disney and watching other people use it was intriguing, but it's really hard to learn something watching other people do it. And I suddenly got this brilliant idea that if I stayed home and bought a computer and bought Photoshop and learned what I wanted to do with it, I could. And so that was what I did. And then it became a friend of mine, Mike Van Cleve, a great cartoonist, musician, good pal. He suggested that I try comics using the Photoshop technique that I'd been working on for other things. And so I did. And I found that it was really, really fun doing comics that way.
So that was a kind of a late career development for you to get into comics.
Well, I always wanted to do comics. And I did comics for years, including some underground comics, one with Timothy Leary, which has popped up lately, which is suddenly people are interested in, which is surprising to me because I did it so long ago. But I always loved comics when I was a kid, and I always wanted to do comics. And so, but the movie, it was hard to make money, at least it was for me in comics. So the movie storyboarding thing kind of became my career. But the love for comics was always there, so it sort of became natural to put the two things together. In the comics, I work with people too, and so it's like casting for a movie, and it's like directing your actors, and there's a lot of interaction, and it's a lot of fun working with people. This would be like Morbid and Extremely Weird Stories, the Dark Horse books.
Right. We'll come to that. But
okay.
Let me come back to Capitol Hill a little bit. Do you at all wish you had foreseen the rise of Mike Huckabee and included him?
Sure. If we'd known he was going to become such a highly visible figure, he would have been in there for sure. It's really hard to predict what's going to happen. But we have a special Screed of Hucky card prepared, which is Huckabee as Chucky. And it's pretty funny. So Dennis is considering rushing out a special card because these are postcards. So this can be done as an individual card. But then again,
Well, I wondered about that. Now, the book is a collection of postcards. I mean, you can actually tear them out and mail them to people. But I have to say, I guess it's the old comic collector in me. It's hard for me to bring myself to tear something out of a book.
Oh, you have to buy two.
Yeah, there you go. Right. Are you and Dennis going to release these as individual postcards this year?
Yes, they are available as individual cards.
And how would one order that?
Through Dennis Kitchen's site. I don't know if they're set up for the individual card orders yet or not. I haven't been involved in that, but I'm sure that he offers them as individual cards. That would be DennisKitchenPublishing.com, I think.
Okay. Well,
or maybe through the capital-hell.com site. There's a link to individual cards.
Well, hopefully they're setting up to take those orders now. Are the Clintons just too easy to make fun of?
Well, I don't hate the Clintons as much as most people, but I guess I wasn't as mean to them as I was to some people, but they're fair game, you know.
And did you have any concern? Obviously, you have to work on a book like this ahead, and obviously you didn't know that like Huckabee would be a rising star on the eve of Iowa. Of course, in a couple of weeks he may be history. So,
right.
But were you anticipating that Barack Obama would continue to be a player by the time the book reached publication?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, I think we figured that he would be, and he and Hillary were probably the most likely Democrats. You take your best guess ahead of time.
Who is the toughest to find just the right monster or scenario for? Who did you really lose sleep over?
People I didn't know that much about. Fred Thompson, for instance. I think Dennis thought we should get Fred Thompson in there because he was making a lot of noise, and I didn't know much about Fred Thompson. I'm not really a politically savvy person, and so I had to, it's kind of like, well, who are you going to lampoon? All right, well, what are they known for? So it's like find out that, and then figure out a monster that seems appropriate. The people that are less well known were harder.
Thompson, yeah, I would think that would be a little tough. Although he's well known, it's I don't know any monsters that are like asleep at the wheel. Not that I mean, I'm with you. I'm just as happy to make fun of one side as the other, frankly.
And we got Bill Maher and Steve Colbert and Jon Stewart and Ann Coulter and Bill O'Reilly, right? And Rush Limbaugh. Got all those kind of people in the mix too. Sean Hannity.
Right. And what was the what was the gag that for Hannity and Stewart?
Oh well, this still is from The Manster, and it also helps if you know your monster movies. There was a Japanese monster movie called The Manster, which was about a guy who grew an extra head. And there's a famous still of this two-headed monster wrestling with a guy. And so I made the two-headed monster into Colbert and Jon Stewart, and Hannity into the guy that they're fighting with. Because I figured he has a big enough mouth to fight two people.
Was that from the two-headed? Was that the Rosie Greer?
No, that was The Manster. The Rosie Greer was the incredible two-headed transplant with Raymond.
Okay, all right. And then the other one I want to point out is The Wicked Witch of the West Wing. Mm-hmm. Condoleezza Rice.
Yeah.
As the Wicked Witch, and George Bush as her pet monkey.
Yeah, that's that famous picture of George Bush that they always use where he's making a goofy face.
And they're looking at into the crystal ball with Nancy Pelosi
and Harry Reid.
And Harry Reid, yeah, I just love that one.
My son came up with the name of that one, The Wicked Witch of the West Wing. He's a helpful lad.
This is great. I mean, Barack Obama as Hellraiser in Fundraiser. I mean, it's just I don't know, folks. If you've got to go look at this again, it's www.capital with an O hell HELL.com. You can see some examples of this. Another great one is John McCain as Dr. Strangelove and Dr. McCainlove.
Yeah, going down with the bomb.
Yeah, it's just you will laugh at this. Some of them I don't want to quite give away, but let's just say that Donald Rumsfeld is in there in a familiar pose. Let's see, who else should I mention here? Michael Moore. You slipped Michael Moore in there. And Karl Rove and Valerie Plame. I mean, it is just so off Quran.
And it's, to my mind, it's an election year, so it's tied in inextricably to the election, but it's also a picture of American politics at a certain time, and that's why I wanted Larry King and other people in it, and that's why some of the people are in it too, because they may not be presidential candidates per se, but that doesn't. It's more than that to me. It's not just about the election, mm-hmm. and the situation is fluid. there's two pictures of Barack Obama. There's actually one called The Empire Strikes Black, where Jesse Jackson is blasting Obama like the Emperor did to Darth Vader. And because in the news, there was an item that Jesse Jackson was criticizing Obama for being too white. And so that was the inspiration for that card. But it would be fun to do an ongoing series, or because you could just go on with this stuff because the news never stops, and the surprises and the outrages never stop.
Let me give out our phone number if anyone would like to call in and ask Pete Von Sholly a question. It is 646-595-3135. We'll get you right through if you have a question. Pete, in all of your comic and cartoon work, well, most of all of it that I've seen, there's some common threads that I think must date back to EC Comics. Were you an EC guy?
Well, I was too young, really. I was born in 1950. Mm-hmm. And that's a handy year to be born when it comes to remembering how old you were when things happened. But EC Comics were just ahead of me. But I had an older brother who had some, so I was fortunate enough to get a glancing blow with those. But they were scary. That's what I remember about them, especially Graham Ingalls. When you're a little kid, they're terrifying. The first cartoonists that I knew about by name were Charles Addams and Dr. Seuss.
Ah, very different.
Yeah, but I loved both of them, and we had some Charles Addams books around the house, and I used to love Dr. Seuss, especially that one McGilligan's Pool, which was in color, which was kind of unusual. But those were real early influences. I didn't really find out about EC Comics, to get back to your question, until much later when they started to reprint them.
Mm-hmm. I mean, is it wrong to assume that you're a fan of horror comics?
Oh, no. I just didn't grow up on those. There weren't that many available to me. But the influence of EC Comics is so pervasive. I started when Creepy came out. They had several of the EC artists, of course, and Eerie, the Warren publications. So that was my EC Comics experience in a way. It was sort of the second generation of those.
And let's see, Dark Horse has published a number of collections of your work, which you kind of referenced earlier. They include Pete Von Sholly's Morbid and Pete Von Sholly's Extremely Weird Stories. Along that same line, are there any kind of inner demons you'd like to expose now on Mr. Media? Do you want to tell us any issues you'd like to tell us about?
Well, I like H.P. Lovecraft. I like horror stories. And I originally wanted to do Morbid as a horror magazine. And I couldn't believe no one had used the name Morbid, because they've got creepy, spooky, eerie, every ghastly, every word you can think of had been used to death, but not morbid. And but what happened is I started making these stories, and they didn't want to be morbid all the time. They wanted to be funny, and so the thing kind of went its own way.
Are there more of them coming?
I have more if somebody wants to publish them. If I enjoy doing them. I did about 400 pages of stuff before I just get involved in a project and go and barreling ahead with it, whether I know it's going to get published or not. So I've got more material. Dark Horse, I don't think they sold that well, to be honest. I think they sold okay, but times are a little tougher, and the comic book market is tough.
Now, these books are different, are somewhat different style than Capital Hell. For example, I'm looking at Pete Von Sholly's Morbid 2, Dead But Not Out, and you've got this incredibly hideous creature with multiple heads. They're all dead, but they're alive, zombie-like, chasing after this rather buxom young lady in a bikini, a common thread also. And in the stories, you've got live actors responding to things in a very Hollywood style. And then you've drawn in, I guess. And now I wonder, are these drawn? Are these watercolor?
They're sculptures.
The style?
They're three-dimensional sculptures. Now, my wife is a fabulous sculptor. Andrea is her name, and she's sculpted a lot of maquettes. We made some movies called Prehysteria, and she sculpted the dinosaurs for those. And she sculpted figures for the Scooby-Doo movies, for the monsters, and all kinds of stuff. So she's very handy to have around, to say the least. So also I worked with another sculptor named Mike Jones who sculpted some things for me. So I would do drawings and somebody would sculpt up a figure. And then I could light the sculpture and be careful to light it the same way I lit the people I was shooting so that when I composited them together, they'd appear as seamless as possible. But I wanted three-dimensional. I wanted everything to be photographic so it would look like it was the same, so it would fit together.
Wow. See, I had no idea, and I imagine most people don't. That looking at these are sculptures. These are not hand drawn. I'm very surprised.
Yeah, by the way, you notice that it's named Pete Von Scholly's Morbid and Pete Von Scholly's Extreme Stories, or Extremely Weird Stories. Vaughn Bodie he went to Syracuse, where I went to college. And he came to our college once and talked, and I met him, and some other cartoonist friends of mine met him, and he told us, always put your name on everything, and put it big, and put it where they can't crop it out.
That goes all the way back to the Will Eisner School, Eisner was famous for putting his name on stuff when he worked for the military. So people left, the guys left the Army, thousands and thousands of guys left the Army. If they saw his work on PS Magazine, they knew Will Eisner because his name was on everything.
Well, it's only smart. My earliest favorite comic book people were John Stanley and Carl Barks, but I didn't know who they were.
Right.
I thought Marge did Little Lulu and Tubby, and I thought Walt Disney did Uncle Scrooge, because those were the names that you saw. Mm-hmm. So I guess kind of with Marvel is when they started to give people credit.
Right, that was a big thing for Stan Lee, of course, was putting people's names on things, and then of course years later, kind of overlooking the names. But that's
well, he made sure to get his name on it.
Yeah, I don't want to pick on Stan.
No, I think Stan and Jack and Ditko and everybody else, the sum is greater than the parts, or whatever that expression is. It took those guys together to do what they did.
Mm-hmm. And what about, there was another element of these comics that was familiar to me. It reminded me of the little photo funnies from National Lampoon 30 years ago. Is that possibly an influence? It's
an influence, but so is Help magazine. Terry Gilliam used to do Fumetti's. Fumetti is, of course, for people who don't know, when you use photographs with word balloons, like comics. Mm-hmm. And Terry Gilliam did some for Help magazine. One really funny story had John Cleese in it, way before Monty Python. So Fumetti is nothing new. I thought I had actually invented something completely new when I did these stories, when I did Morbid. Mm-hmm. And I showed Sergio Aragones, and he went, Fumetti. Oh, shit, that's right, Fumetti. I guess I didn't invent this. I thought I did, but I guess the difference here is the Fumettis I've seen, remember Robert Crumb did them in Weirdo? Uh-huh. The Fumettis that I had seen involved usually people would pose and take pictures and stick word balloons on them. So the degree of manipulation of the pieces is what's different with what I do.
Right. Well, I always thought when National Lampoon did it in the 70s, it was just a way to sneak more topless women into the magazine.
Nothing wrong with that.
I was always for that, and actually that brings me to another question. There are plenty of busty babes in your work, real live models, not hand drawn. Where do you find them, and what do you tell them they're going to be used for?
You find them working at the 7-Eleven. In work situations, any casual social situation. It's a casting sort of consideration. But many things can drive the creation of a story. But I just ask people, and you'd be surprised how many of them just think, first of all, I draw all the stories first. And so I've got pencil drawings of everything.
Mm-hmm.
So when I go and get you, Bob Andelman, to be in my story, I know the pictures I'm going to need. I know what the light source is, and outside of maybe 2 or 3 changes of costume, if the story dictates that, I don't need to take up a hell of a lot of your time.
Mm.
So I can tell people, look, I only need you for an hour or 2. I'll pay you a little bit if I have to, and they think it sounds like fun. They think it sounds interesting, and you'd be surprised how many people are happy to do it, just by the asking.
Now, you a few years ago, you also produced a slightly different genre, but related, monster magazine Spoofs. And was this the title? Do I have this right? Is the full title Crazy, Hip, Groovy, Go-Go, Way Out Monsters?
It is. And, I put those words at the top of the logo. This was an imitation of crass commercialism in 50s and 60s monster magazines, Famous Monsters of Filmland being the prototype for all that. But when people were trying to sell to the kids, they'd write crazy, groovy, hip, go-go, way out. They'd just throw words like that at it. Old square people trying to sound cool. And I just slapped a bunch of those words up across the cover, meaning that this was what the publisher would be trying to tell you. And John Morrow, the actual publisher in this case, said, well, why don't we just call it that? I wanted to call it Shitload of Monsters, but he wouldn't do that.
Wouldn't go for that, huh?
No, strangely enough.
And so these are still available from two, as in TWO, Tomorrow's
right.
Publishing. And how many of these were there?
Just 2.
Oh, there were just the 2. Okay.
Yeah.
They're take on the old Famous Monsters of Filmland and that whole type of thing, right?
Yes, there was a whole barrage of magazines that tried to jump on that bandwagon, and this is sort of a lampoon of all of that. And some people we make some jokes about Ray Harryhausen. I love Ray Harryhausen. He was a great inspiration to me. So this is hopefully it's all good natured and not taken in the wrong spirit by anybody. But you cannot do a magazine like that without having Forey Ackerman and Ray Harryhausen and maybe Ray Bradbury, some of the people that were always in your face, in those magazines.
I love the cover lines, on these things like stills that were too crummy for the studios, ads and promos disguised as news, boring stills of people standing around. And of course, the thing that Jim Warren was famous for: endless ads for weird, cheap garbage you may never even get.
Just all flowed naturally, part of my youth and part of my impression. But I love those magazines. It sounds like I'm making fun of them, but I think anything can be ribbed. But,
well, let me. I want to repeat the phone number again. If anyone would like to call in, it is 646-595-3135. You're certainly welcome to just sit back and enjoy this interview with Pete von Sholly, author of the new Postcard book, Capital Hell. But we'd also love to have you call. And if you're sitting there and you're enjoying this, please be sure to check this off as a favorite and add Mr. Media to your list. I know you want to talk about dinosaurs. So let's talk about dinosaurs. You like to mix them up in your work, combining dinosaurs with real people, which I'm thinking is a little bit Jurassic Park, which is your film background, but it's also a little bit of creationism too. You want to touch on that a little bit?
The Lost World by Conan Doyle might be one of the first and one of my favorite books involving the survival of dinosaurs into our times. There's really nothing new about that in fiction. I don't think of it as having anything to do with creationism myself. That I think anybody who looks at the fossil record and looks at science will find that that's just absurd to think that literal creationism, to take it that way. It's so no, I don't. I just look for any excuse to draw and paint dinosaurs.
Why? What is it about dinosaurs?
Well, there's a good question. Why do people like cars, or why do people like horses? We all start out. There's this great musician, Tay Zonday, who's on YouTube, who did Chocolate Rain, and he's done a lot of really incredible music. He's a singer songwriter who plays the piano. He's this amazing guy who's on YouTube. And somebody asked him about why did you become a musician? And it's just kind of a dumb question, but his response was it included the question, well, why did you become silent? Which I thought was a great question, because don't we all start out singing and with crayons, making pictures and doing stuff, and we all do that when we're little, and some of us stop, and some of us, stay with it, and it's kind of like we all like dinosaurs. I think when we're kids, all kids go through a dinosaur phase. Some never get over it. Maybe it's arrested development of some kind. I don't know. I mean, I still love dinosaurs. I still love comic books. I still love rock and roll music. I mean, I like the things that I liked when I was little. And those things inspired me, I loved artwork with dinosaurs. There's a guy, Mo Golub, that painted the Turok covers that were a big highlight of my comic book reading youth. Particularly the covers that Mo Golub did were fantastic. And so you see that, and it's just something exciting about it that makes you want to do it. I want to do that. And I'm still there.
And what you'd really like is to be able to take your pet dinosaur for a walk around the block, wouldn't you?
Oh, indeed. Well, the movie Prehysteria was kind of like that. Mm-hmm. That was a movie I made up and sold to this, well, let's not get libelous here, this fellow named Charlie Band, who made 3 movies based on the concept, but it was about a kid with pet dinosaurs.
Mm. And I'm sorry, Pete. I want to use that as a segue. I want to talk about your film work. Tell folks about some of the other films you've worked on. I think you've mentioned Prehysteria and Dinosaur, and I think in the opening I mentioned Mars Attacks and The Shawshank Redemption. What are some of the other films you've worked on?
Oh, well, I've done all of Frank Darabont's movies so far, the Mist and The Green Mile, and even The Majestic, some stuff for that, plus his first movie, Buried Alive. And Darkman, which was really fun, because that was kind of a comic book, and Sam Raimi is a riot to work with. A lot of crappy movies. They pay just the same as the good movies, and there are many more of them.
And didn't you work on Tim Burton's unproduced Superman movie?
Yeah, I did. I was basically called in to draw monsters. The Brainiac, I guess, was going to have like a monster zoo on his spaceship, and I guess they weren't happy with the monsters where they were getting, and so a friend of mine recommended me, and I worked for just a few weeks, and Tim Burton came in one day, and I knew him from Mars Attacks and from James and the Giant Peach. And he looked at the monsters, and he said, "I love your monsters, Pete." I said, "Oh, thank you." And he said the most fun he ever had was drawing monsters at Disney when he was young, early in his career, I mean. So I was just kind of brought in to do that.
And you mentioned James and the Giant Peach, which is another Burton film. How is it working with some of these guys like Burton and Darabont that you've worked with a couple of times? How does that take shape?
Well, it's quite different, actually. When I started doing storyboards, and as part of the segue, if I may, I said I wanted to be a comic book artist, and I couldn't make any money because I was no good. But it was something I wanted to do. And then when I saw storyboards, I didn't know what storyboards were up until I moved to California from upstate New York after meeting Vaughn Bodie and all that, and met a lot of people out here who did comics and stuff. And still, even though there was George DiCaprio, Leonardo's father was a great help, and Vaughn Bodie introduced him, and he helped look out for us. But I saw storyboards, and I thought, that looks kind of like comics. Maybe I could learn to do that. And a lot of people get into animation, I think, who find that here's a place an artist can make a living. And there's not that many. So I got into doing storyboards because they look kind of like comics, and then I have to learn about film and the differences between film and comics. But when I started with Frank Darabont and a few other people, it was more one-on-one. Like, you sit down with the director and have a meeting. And what I like to do was take pencil and paper and sketch, and the director describes the shots that he wants. And sometimes directors want your input. Sometimes they know what they want, and they're not really looking for input. You figure that out really quick. On the bigger movies and in feature animation, it's more of a team kind of thing. There's less interaction with the directors, which I think is a shame, and it's not as much fun. Mars Attacks, there were 3 of us doing storyboards, and one guy interacted. Michael Jackson, his name is. Great guy, great friend, great artist. He was sort of Tim Burton's guy, so he would be the one having the meetings, and then he would tell us. He would give us the feedback. On The Mist, that was just like old times with Frank, which is just the 2 of us sitting down, talking, drawing, having fun. So different directors have different approaches.
Tell me about you and Darabont. I mean, you worked on Shawshank, which is rather unlike a lot of these other films.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Storyboarding as a process usually involves stunts and special effects. And so on Shawshank, there wasn't that many of those. There was an opening helicopter shot, and there were some shots that were going to involve wire removal and things where people get dangled off of roofs and dropped off of tiers in prisons and things. So we went to Ohio and went to the actual prison that they used for the exteriors, and it was every now and then you travel too, which is a side thing, but it's a fun thing about storyboarding. But movies like The Shawshank Redemption don't usually require as much storyboarding as something like The Mist because it's mostly for special effects.
Mm-hmm. And do you have any other Darabont stuff coming up?
Well, he's supposed to do Fahrenheit 451. I don't know how much storyboarding there will be in that. I'm not in touch with Frank so much outside of working arrangements.
Okay.
So
Go ahead.
Well, a lot of people are like, they're busy. So when they need you, they call you.
I understand.
And when you're done, it's not rudeness or unfriendliness. They're on to the next thing.
Of course. No, I understand that completely. Yeah. Now, your latest storyboards were for a film called Superhero, which is, I gather, in the satire form of Airplane. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's the group of people that's been doing the Scary Movies films, and Leslie Nielsen is in it. And that was more like it. I was talking about how some of these things are done in little teams of storyboard artists working individually, where the directors will cherry pick the shots that they like. If you come up with an idea that, I like that, I will use that. Superhero was like the old days, where it was me and the director, Craig Mazin, and we would be sometimes down at the set. He would say, come to the set. We're shooting Monday at this high school gymnasium, and show up there at noon, and at lunchtime I'll take a break and draw with you. So we would really knock out the stuff, but it was like being in the trenches, There was no time. Feature film animation is this big, long, rambling process where you try things and throw things out and start over again, and I don't really like it that much. This is a lot more fun because it's immediate. And this is, David Zucker is the producer, and Robert Weiss, and they've produced a ton of big movies. So it's going to be very much the same kind of tone with a gag every couple seconds. But it's like Spider-Man and Batman, all the superhero movies that have been made lately. It's kind of like they combine them all into one spoof. Should be pretty funny.
Sounds like fun.
There's a scene where the young hero character, like Batman, he blames himself for the death of his parents. And a hoodlum holds them up. They're coming out of the theater at night in a dark alley, and a hoodlum holds them up. And the kid goes and grabs the gun and accidentally shoots his father and drops his gun on the ground and shoots his mother. And he's talking at the flashback about, I always blamed myself for their death. And in fact, it's totally his fault. So that's an example of one of the scenes that could play pretty funny.
Sounds good. Well, Pete, I want to say thanks so much for joining us on Mr. Media today.
Oh, it was great fun.
Enjoyed having you. I've enjoyed your work now this past year. We've been in contact, and you're always sending me something I get a laugh out of in the middle of the day, so I appreciate that. And I'll remind people that they can check out Capital Hell, your new book. They can see some examples on the web at www.capital-hell.com, or they can go to your personal site, Von Shollywood. That's VONS and then Hollywood.com for more examples of your work. But again, thanks very much for being here with us.
Well, my pleasure, Bob.
All right. And folks, if you'd like to keep up with Mr. Media's Friday interviews, you can subscribe to the site via email at www.mrmedia.com. You can also subscribe to the feed via the podcast section of iTunes. And please come back again next week for another Fridays with Mr. Media.